Let's start the Conservation Commission meeting for Wednesday, October 19th, 2016. If you are recording, please let us know. This is being recorded. And if you have your cell phones on, please put them on sleep. Appreciate it. Continuances. Edwin Snyder, RT1 Brox Court, or 2 Brox Court, is continued till November 2nd. As well as Sunset House LLC at 15 Hallowell, that's continued to the November 2nd as well. And Zarella, 125 Wallwinnet Road and 129 Wallwinnet Road are continued till January 18th of 2017. So I think that's it. With that, let's start the public meeting. Do we have any comments from the public that have nothing to do with issues being heard tonight? Seeing not. Okay. Seeing not, let's go to the public hearing notices of intent. And we're starting with LaRusso, 316 Pulpus Road.
Good evening. David Haynes for the applicant. And this has been continued several times. We've been waiting for Natural Heritage. And we did get a response from Natural Heritage, a favorable response from Natural Heritage today, in that it is not subject to the Wetlands Protection Act because there's no rare wetlands wildlife out there. But we have worked out an agreement about how to manage the St. Andrew's Cross. They called it the St. Andrew's Cross in the letter, so I'm going to say it. I'm tired of beating around the bush on this. This is a revised plan, and we have also asked for a waiver for 2 things. One is Natural Heritage would like us to maintain, there's an area between 25 and 50, a bit below 25 to the wetland boundary, that they would like to see maintained, ongoing maintenance, because it's all St. Andrew's Cross. And I'll go over what we're going to do to maintain that in a second. The other one is looking at this further, the applicant would like to have a full basement, so I'm asking for a waiver for the possibility of a structure within 2 feet of the water table. It will not be within the water table. The water table's at 20. It'll be at 21 or 22, so it'll be above the water table. There will be no dewatering necessary, no short or long-term dewatering necessary. Also shown on here, there's we have a cobblestone border that demarcates the edge of the endangered species area. Actually, it's 5 feet off, and that just helps us locate where, when they're mowing, where to mow and where not to mow. Other than that, there's a few other minor changes. Actually, the house has been redesigned to increase the setback from the endangered species from what it was up to 20, and there's actually the cabana is at 15, but we settled that with the Natural Heritage from the endangered species, not from the wetland boundary. Everything on the wetland is greater than 50. We're going to let, there's a small area of lawn, we're going to let that naturalize. That's inside of 25 in front of the house. So we are asking for those 2 waivers. The management plan for the endangered species is basically mow it in the dormant season at a height of 6 inches, and no fertilizers or irrigation within 25 feet. Also shown on this plan is what is proposed as lawn. And then, so no lawns within 25 feet of the endangered species area, and to mow it twice a year, well actually at the end of the year and maybe at the beginning of the year, but not during the growing season, at a height of 6 inches up is what was finally considered to be reasonable. But they do allow us to go in and trim either by hand or with a weed whacker, carefully going between the clumps to keep the herbaceous stuff down in the summertime and keep the sun in there. Because this area, frankly, this area has been mowed for the last 30 years, and it's come in as an unbelievable community of it, population of it. So basically that's it. We do have a letter from Natural Heritage outlining those management techniques and stating It is not subject to the Wetlands Protection Act because it doesn't have a rare wetland wildlife. And if you have any questions.
Questions from the board?
So both the pool and the basement are within 2 feet?
Maybe, yes. I've asked for both the pool and the basement for the waiver. But it's definitely not below the water table. This is up at elevation 29, so 29 down 8 feet would be 21. And the pool will probably be raised a little bit, so it probably won't be down to 29, down to 21. But it will be above the water table, but it will be within 2 feet. But no dewatering will be necessary in the short or long term. Same with the basement.
Any other questions?
I just have a curiosity question. When you told them that this area's been mowed for 30 years and it's an unbelievable stand at St. Andrews Cross, are they thinking about changing their management protocol and this stuff? It just seems interesting, yeah.
They kept going, well, it's such a rare species. I said, it's rare in Massachusetts
Yes.
because this is the northern end of its range. This is the only place it doesn't exist on Martha's Vineyard.
Right.
It doesn't exist on Long Island. It's New Jersey and then Nantucket.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of it out here.
Yeah.
Maybe
It's
you all
all
know.
No, it's all over the place. That does really great.
I found that probably at least half the lawns in Swan have St. Andrews across it. Some of the population's pretty big.
You said this was the fifth largest, and this is
I don't know
significant.
I don't even know if it's the fifth largest. It's a good size one, but
Well, I mean-
there are definitely bigger ones out there.
It's a new business. Okay,
Thank you for your patience on this.
questions from the public on this one? Okay, seeing not, we are ready to close. Are you ready to close?
I'm ready to close. I've been ready to close for a while.
We're good to go.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Motion to close.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that closes. Great. Since it's continued. Alan A. Shuck, trustee, 45 Quidnet Road.
Yeah,
I'm
it is. He said it.
Oh, I didn't hear it.
I mumble a lot.
Yeah. You know, we covered for Monday already?
I know.
Back at it again?
Absolutely back at it. Last time I saw you, you were driving the other way.
I know, speedily.
That was tricky.
Wherever you guys are ready.
Good evening, Bob Emack and Sarah Alger for the applicant. What you have before you is a request to do some work on a coastal beach and in land subject to coastal storm flowage. There's an existing studio, I guess is what it is called and what it is. It's basically a beach cabana that they use to change. It's on Sackatchew Pond. It is below, the first floor is below the current 100-year flood elevation. What we're proposing to do is lift the building up 3 feet from its present elevation. And that work's all going to be done by hand. Everything's going to be carried down the beach stairs, which you see on the plan here. So all the materials, all the equipment's going to be carried down the beach stairs. Toscana says they can do such a small building with pretty small equipment. Part of the existing foundation is a solid blocks CMU, and part of it is on piers. So the portion that's on solid block is going to be raised accordingly with solid block. They're going to install flood vents, and then the piers are going to be built up as well. So in addition, now that we're raising the building, we have to put on some more stairs, there's so we can get access to the building. They're shown here. There's a door here, and there's a door here. Door here. So that's why the stairs are somewhat elongated. There's one step here, step to the existing porch, and then another step up to get into this door here. We're also proposing, right, yeah, this is a blow up of the entire lot. It's 45 Quicknet Road. We're also proposing to put in, while we're doing the work, we're going to add a monitoring system to the existing, there's an existing sewer septic pump right next to the steps here. And while we're doing this work, we're going to add a monitoring system to that so that the flows are monitored to make sure that there's no infiltration into the pump. So if the pump's running overtime, the monitoring system keeps a record of that and also transmits any problems to a central data system. I'm not sure exactly where it transmits. It goes
Somewhere.
but there is a record of it, so, and it can be, and it is monitored. So, can you think of anything else?
Well, I just would say that the history of this is that it was a cottage. It was in the Norcross family. So it's a historic cottage. About 18 years ago or so, when the current owner had the property, he didn't enlarge this, but he kind of renovated it, shingled it. And at that time, there was another cottage that was actually closer to the beach. It was down here. That one was removed. This one was renovated. It had its kitchen removed, so it's no longer used for sleeping or eating. It's just used very seasonally as a beach cottage. In fact, they blow out the pump and septic system and shut it down at the end of the season, so most of the year it's not even functioning. It's completely seasonal. And the reason that they're doing the work is that the level of the pond has been getting higher and higher, and now it's kind of lapping at the underside of the house at the really bad parts of the winter. So he wants to get it up, and he wants to only have to go down there and do this disturbance once, which is why we're going to the elevation 10.
Right. It's flood zone 8, so building code would require you to put the first floor to 9. But just right at the water's edge is actually flood zone elevation 9, so it seems prudent to go to 10 at this point. Don't have to do it twice. They say sea level's rising, and
Yeah, I mean, the HDC did approve the plans, and even with the 3-foot raise, we're still below the top of the bank here, so it's not like we're topping off.
I'll hop in there. We actually did get 3 separate letters from abutters inside of the Maker Pack that came in, kind of in terms of crabs, that are all direct abutters that are in support of this project. It's a very rare day when we get letters in support of that. So
Probably expecting that.
I wanted to make it clear.
we are subject to natural heritage, and I don't think we've heard from them yet.
So,
So is there a septic system associated with this?
There is. It's
Where's the leach field?
the leach field is up above.
Is it pumping up?
Let's see, I don't show it on the plan, but yeah, this is the property is rather large. Quidnet Road's over here, so it pumps from here along here, and the system is over in here, up outside.
So you're demolishing the current structure?
No.
No.
We're
Just raising it up.
we're just
Maybe raising is a bad term. Lifting.
lifting, we're lifting it,
There you go. Raised with an S, not with a C.
yes, with an IS and putting building up the foundation and then putting it right back in place. We explored places to go with it. There's really nowhere to go that gets it any further away than it
And
is.
so they say they're gonna do it by hand. How do you mean? And they're not gonna dig the new foundation by hand, I wouldn't think.
You're just gonna add on to the top.
They're just adding on to it.
Existing
Oh, okay.
foundation.
And it's gonna be block, are they building another block or something?
Some of it's block, and yeah, it's all block now, and they're gonna do block. I mean, even the piers are block.
Okay,
But on the solid part, they are gonna put the required flood vents in.
yeah.
And I may have missed this, since the pond does get so high, what time of year are you planning to do this?
Well, whenever possible, if the pond is up where we can't do it, then they won't be able to do it. But there's a limit of work shown on here.
Not for nothing, the pond is getting opened on Friday.
So
that may help.
starting soon.
So that means it'll be at its lowest for the next month or so.
They want to do it as soon as they get their
Big
approvals.
storm.
Because I've seen the water right up to this one.
Yeah, it literally like laps underneath, yeah.
Any other questions? Questions from the public? Okay. So you'd like to continue for another 2 weeks?
Well, we have to.
Yeah, I would say though, if this is one that you guys don't have any questions, maybe we could certainly draft an order for this.
Sure.
So next meeting, if Natural Heritage says okay, we can go on.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Great.
Is there any additional information you'd like to see for the next meeting?
No excavation or anything, right? It's
No.
all sorts of
Please,
stuff.
please.
Pretty
Natural
straightforward.
Heritage letter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Simple thing.
okay,
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Continue for 2 weeks. Ray's 19 East Creek Road.
Yeah, one over there. You can leave that there, Jeff, maybe, I think. Well, you know what?
Thank you, Sharon.
What you have on Thank you for the applicant, Paul Santos, along with Steve Cohen, representing Greg Reyes, the applicant on the proposed notice of intent. This is a notice of intent for property located at 19 East Creek Road, which is the last house at the end of East Creek Road, abutting the Island Home property, which is accessed off of Orange Street. Visible from the creeks, it is a parcel of land in which this dwelling was constructed back in the early to mid-'80s. The home was constructed first. It is a single-family dwelling constructed on a pile foundation system, approximately 1.5 stories in height with regard to the living space. There is a pile-supported pier or dock also on the lot. That was permitted after the construction of the home in the late 80s. It does have a Chapter 91 license, and it is a fully permitted and approved dock, which is associated with the property. Property itself is approximately 38,586 square feet. It's basically bounded by the Island Home property. To the southwest and to the north, the property line is essentially the high water associated with the tidal creek. The property is serviced by public sewer and public water. There is noted on the plan, you'll see a sewer pump pit, which is located to the south side of the existing dwelling. Their water and sewer feeds along the side of along the back of the property and then goes through what is now the Goldberg property out to Orange Street. So there's an easement which runs the property line from this piece out into Orange Street. Originally granted by Patricia Bachman when Mike Bachman owned both his parcel and the Goldberg parcel.
So the site is serviced by water, sewer utilities through that private easement. The resource areas are essentially the salt marsh, in which the limit of the salt marsh is depicted by a flag line that was done by Brian Madden at LEC. Those flags are depicted in red on this plan and runs the border of the northerly side of the property. Moving up, the site is entirely within land subject to coastal storm flowage. Then as we approach the backside of the property, there is a bank, which is a policy coastal bank under DEP's standards. So the flood zone hits the backside of that policy bank. The top of the bank becomes the top of the regulated coastal bank. That line is depicted. You'll see at the top of the plan you have an AE zone, which is the coastal flood zone. You have the red flags, which are the limit of the salt marsh. And then further out into the salt marsh, you'll see the VE zone. That's the mapped VE or velocity zone that's associated with the new 2014 flood mapping. The existing first floor of the dwelling is at elevation 9.7. The VE zone in this area is at elevation 9, and the AE zone is elevation 8. So the existing structure is above both the current velocity zone and the current coastal A zone. There is on the lower side a garage which comes into the property that is below the flood zone elevation. The first floor of the structure is elevated above. It's, like, as I said, completely elevated on a pile system foundation. However, it is skirted. The building is skirted now with a skirting around it. The proposal before you is to demolish or raise that existing, with a Z, raise that existing structure and construct a new building footprint on the subject property. I believe as early as last night, I think the HDC did issue a demolition permit. That's right. In which Steve obtained from the HDC last night. The intent would be to come in and construct essentially the same footprint area, if you will, just reallocating somewhat a little bit on the lot. And you'll see there's a blue, whereas we don't have a lot of information right now on moving forward with what the structure may look like. What we've done is we've defined in blue here a proposed building envelope, the area of which is essentially the same area on the ground as the dwelling, the decking, all anything that has to do with the structure is essentially that blue area. I think it's approximately, if I remember correctly, it's about 3,500 square feet or so of area that we've depicted. The existing building footprint with regard to ground cover under the definition in the zoning code would be about 1,600 square feet. So you have about 1,600 square feet of building that would be subject to ground cover. The rest of it is outdoor decking, all elevated essentially at the majority of it at the first floor level looking out over the creeks. The proposal, we did file with NHESP. We are right on the borderline here with regard to the MESA Act. We did file with them, have not heard back yet, and as of this moment too, do not have a DEP file number. So we will be asking, unfortunately, for a continuance today, but with regard to those two issues, we haven't received any response back with regard to the DEP file number or the NHESP response. The proposal, albeit a kind of a redo and a renovation of what's there, would require waivers. The site is essentially entirely within the 25-foot natural undisturbed setback. It's entirely within the 50-foot no-build setback. We would be constructing, I would say, we would be constructing a foundation system, although it be at piles within 2 feet of the 2-foot separation of high groundwater, which typically we don't see in a coastal area, but I think the salt marsh standards do have the 2-foot groundwater separation standard similar to the bordering vegetated wetland standard. So that's why I've included that. And then also, we would be seeking to maintain the existing sewer pump pit within land subject to coastal storm flowage, which under the standards for a the standards under that provision of the act, which is the land subject to coastal storm flowage, you're not allowed to have a septic tank or a leach pit. So again, this is an existing feature that would be willing to maintain. And again, the 25-foot and the 50-foot zones essentially overlap. There is no, you're completely within land subject to coastal storm flowage and within the setbacks to both the coastal, policy coastal bank and the salt marsh. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have with regard to what the proposal is.
Yeah. Let me, if I could just piggyback off for 2 seconds, I want to sort of pitch you on what the concept is, because I don't think we're trying to get an approval for a 3,000 square foot house today. Essentially, if you look at these little line with the little dots, that's the property line. So you can see we're pretty squeezed in there between the zoning setbacks and the salt marsh and the 2 wetlands. There's basically nowhere this house could go except horizontally. And the concept is what the buyer would like to do is pull the house away from the salt marsh and then spread out to the sides. And that's, you know, the blue box there is more of a concept than a, hey, we'd like to build a house, a 3,000 square foot house that big. We already understand that that's not, you know, something the HDC would ever approve. It's not something that you guys are likely to approve. But what we're trying to do is find how much sort of buildable area. And so what we've taken is the existing buildable area and try to say, okay, if we pull it back and go sideways, can he replace it with a house that has more livable program and maybe a little less deck, or more, you know, it would probably be a larger house, but not 3,500 square foot house. I don't want you to think that that's the concept. And the improvements would be getting the whole house up out of the flood zone, including that slab at grade garage. It would be pulling away from the salt marsh, and it would be removing the invasive species, the Rosa rugosa, the Phragmites, and whatever else we can get at in there, which I think would be all beneficial. And I do want to address one point that was in your inspection report. There was a suggestion by, I think it was Bruce Perry who wrote it, who said, you know, any kind of change out there or a bigger house out there might be a negative impact on wetland scenic views. And I actually think our approach would be the opposite. I don't know if you're familiar with this house, but it's basically as obtrusive as possible. The entire balcony, including that rounded balcony raised off of the ground, is all these white balusters. It's forward gables that are all painted white. The whole house is trim. It's got these large, oversized, disproportionate windows with metal storm covers on them. It has a large, you know, painted garage door. It sticks out much disproportionate compared to its actual size. And I think we know going in with you, and especially with the HCC, the replacement from this house is going to have to be a more organic design, you know, no white paint, less gable forward, those kind of things, so that the house blends into the environment more. And that's a concept that our client is very comfortable with. And so basically what he'd like to do is get more program and but also have something that's less obtrusive. And I think you guys know the difference. You can have a very small house with a gable forward painted white, and, you know, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and you can have a bigger program, a bigger house that is, you know, more natural looking just because of the design and the trim and everything. So I think the one question we'd really like you to answer today, to the extent you can, is, are you comfortable with the concept of this house essentially pulling back, going up, and going sideways to some extent, without having, you know, and then if you are, we would obviously come back with plans that we would flush out. But that's what we're looking for today, is can we go, get it up out of the flood zone, pull it back, and go sideways.
So just while they finish, just hop in, just for the record, we did do a field viewing at this site on Monday with, see if I remember everyone, with Commissioners Topham, Steinauer, Shampoo, Bennett, and Harrisman present. So.
And just to give you a little bit of the right now, the peak, if you will, of that house is, I think it's maybe like a 1.5 story, I believe it is. But the peak of that house right now is essentially at or just above the tree line from our island home. It's kind of, there is a chimney that pops up above it. I did measure just to get a sense of what the height was from the marsh side up to the top of that peak right now, and I measured it about 25. It's about, right now it's about 25 feet from ground elevation in the front of the marsh to that peak.
Yeah.
It's about 17 feet from the deck and another 6 feet from the deck down to the marsh right now. Just to kind of give a sense of the scale of it, because it is pretty well hidden from, it's hidden from around the home side, from the creeks, obviously. It's, you can't miss it.
So, yeah, so that's the concept.
Sorry. Was the garage on slab permitted? Or is that an unpermitted part of this structure?
I would have to, I've got all the original DEP. The DEP, when it was originally approved, it was actually a DEP requirement that it was to be constructed on pilings. That was the only requirement. I haven't looked at the building department plans with regard to what was permitted, but it was a requirement that the structure would be elevated on pilings. So to answer your question, I don't know exactly how the permitting process went on that part of it.
And that's something that I looked at in our office a little bit, and it's, the history of permitting on this place is kind of sordid, to say the least. I mean, it involves DEP being the issuing authority on the permit, that permit not being acted on, the owners then coming back and getting that re-permitted, and then doing the work, and then doing the piers separately, is kind of the really short summary to that. But it involved I don't know the exact timeline, but it seemed like a pretty lengthy suit. There was a point where the Conservation Commission declined purchasing the entire property for
$70,000.
for $70,000, which is a pretty paltry number given,
Even in '83.
yeah, given where we are today. So we're left with this.
Yeah,
I would say I don't believe there are any outstanding
No.
building permits. So to that extent, the foundation, the system, the house, the dwelling would have had to be permitted through the building department.
okay. I'm just wondering if that came in like after the fact, and maybe shouldn't be counted in the square footage. I just am wondering where that factors in.
Well, we could certainly check.
Are you saying that this blue box is the same area of the house
Yes.
and decks?
Index, yeah.
Index.
I want to say it's about 3,500 square feet, if I remember. If I feel correctly.
And do we have a sense of architecturally, how tall this new structure is going to be?
I'm sure it wouldn't be approved at more than a story and a half, but where that starts and where it ends, Paul could tell you better.
So we're going up an additional 3 feet, Paul, about?
I think, I was just looking at it just a minute ago. Until we look at specifically whether we're going to go to the velocity zone or not, it may be a foot and a half, maybe 2 feet. I would say at the most probably 2 feet.
Yeah.
So 27 out of the ground, and
You know.
if we're at 25.
But the system, this house right now is elevated above both the velocity
Yep.
zone and the
Right. So,
flood zone. So it may be that it's able to stay at the same elevation. So
but the garage is not. The garage.
no, garage wouldn't be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I assume from an HCC point of view that they would not want to see a single long ridge line. There would be at least a deviation in that ridge height.
And you're not sure what percent would be decking versus house? I just see decking that's at essentially ground floor level as not impacting views as much as the front of a house that's going to go up a story and a half.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a architectural, program.
And it'd be back in front of us with that anyways.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want to have zero deck. So, there would for sure be the desire to increase the footprint of the house and increase the usable space, living space, like eliminate the garage and things like that. But at the same time, the deck, a little 400 square foot deck might be the best part of the whole house. So,
We try and reuse existing files and then just add, as you go towards the north.
I think if they could be incorporated, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea. It would just be a
Yeah,
question of whether the height would be work on them or not. But yeah, they're all there. I don't know how they would drill or what they are. I mean, I'm sure I could probably do some digging and try to come up with a plan that maybe how deep they are or what they are. But They're substantial piles. I mean,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
pretty good sized piles.
Yeah.
I mean, they're 12, I think they're 12-inch piles.
I think back to having to drill new ones,
Yeah.
an issue.
So the existing living space is 1,600 square feet,
No, just the footprint.
just the footprint,
Yeah.
Yes.
not including the deck.
Not including the deck, no. Yeah. So ground cover, under the definition of ground cover in the zoning code, which is basically the building, which includes the garage and everything, that's 1,600. Yeah.
But that number, just to be clear, doesn't include second story unless it overhangs the
Right.
first floor.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
frozen
Mhm.
floor
Yeah.
area. It's just
That's right.
Right.
It's just what's on
Which,
the
I
ground.
don't know how much second floor there is, even in that, like you said, that half story or whatever.
it's like this piece here.
Yeah.
So
This is an interesting application because we're voting on
Well,
for
so
them to go forward.
there's
with
some options.
submitting it.
Well, one, we have 2 weeks
Yeah.
to
For sure.
roll it over a little
Yeah.
bit because we're waiting for natural heritage to come back. I think what the applicant's looking for is more of a, are we headed in a direction that could receive a permit so they could continue and flesh out better details? I
Mhm.
think as you guys are reviewing an application like this, because it's tricky to look at it without the architectural plans at the end, I think if you talked about kind of some reasonable choices for views and setbacks, where you were looking at, kind of minimum setbacks off the wetlands, like, we would like to see at least, 2 feet from the wetland line or 5 feet from the wetland line, and then looking at, since we've been talking about the height needs to be there, and having some allowance in there, but to kind of give them something to shoot for. I mean, obviously you don't want to, there's zoning and HDC to take in consideration, but you also don't want to see a structure that's growing 10-foot vertical
Right.
on the site because it impacts the wetland scenic views. If that's where you're looking for, I think, percentage of house to deck, for us, well, in a view sense, is interesting. They both count equally as structure under our
Right.
definition. Decks and houses aren't distinguished in that sense. And I think if you were looking at the scenic views in this case, I think it's, again, looking more at what the face would look like in the height, not necessarily if you look from the top down, if the house was 20 feet wide and the deck was 10, or the house was 15 and the deck was 20.
Yeah.
So I think you guys can kind of bound in from there and kind of set some parameters to do work. I know, it's kind of interesting because we've
It's
never had
interesting,
a
yeah.
case like this before,
And-
where you have resource areas on both sides.
So,
It's a pretty unusual.
and is,
It's an interesting application.
Yeah.
is there a
yeah.
construction protocol to keep any debris, et cetera, out of our resource area, or are we just gonna
Oh,
park
no, we're gonna have to.
at the land
yeah, I mean,
bank?
As I said, we're mostly looking at the footprint now, but there's gonna have to be a detailed construction protocol, there's gonna have to be, the
Yeah.
full architecturals, the full foundation plans, it's gonna be
Yeah.
pretty substantial on
Yeah.
how this would happen, just the demo component of it alone,
It's gonna be like one wheelbarrow at a time.
Yeah. So just to give a sense of again, to look, so if I'm gonna look at, like, the area, say, where the bump
Out
out
on
is, or
street.
the quarter circle areas on the deck, from that point to the marsh is about 6.5 feet. From the deck point to the peak of that roof is right now is about 17. So that's kind of how it looks, just in that one
Yeah.
particular profile, just to kind of give you a sense of that floor system is now 6.5, 7 feet above that, what was out there for original grade.
And when you come back, I'd like to have just the normal plot plan, please, because I'm finding this confusing
Okay.
with the color. And am I correct from looking at this? If this was new construction, we wouldn't permit it because it's all,
We wouldn't be here.
it wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So what you're asking us to do, in fact, is to sort of shoehorn in a bigger building than exists there under the guise of, whatever. When my inclination would be, if you wanted to make new construction, it should be a smaller footprint rather than a larger one. So I'm having difficulty sort of grasping this one.
Right. Well, from your point of view, from the Concom's point of view, there's roughly 3,500 square feet of structure here. And so really what we want to do is just reclaim some of that structure for the house in trade for pulling it back. Now, could we give up some area as part of this? probably. The house doesn't necessarily have to have a 3,000 square foot footprint.
It says 1,600, doesn't it, Steve?
The existing, yeah. No, but I mean, like a new one. We're not
So
necessarily.
a new one, from my point of view, should be smaller than a 1,600 footprint.
Yeah.
So I'm just,
I think that would be the end of our conversation. We wouldn't be back with that.
well, I'm saying that I'm
Yeah.
feeling uncomfortable with this because you're really asking for a larger new house where if there wasn't an existing house there, we wouldn't, as you said, you wouldn't be in front of us. So
Right.
I
Well,
don't know how my other fellow commissioners feel on this. But
I kind of have to agree. We increased the living space, you increase the amount of people who are going to be staying there, the amount of cars that are going to be coming through there. There's obviously going to be an increased impact to the site. And was the deck permitted with the house as well?
I would think some type of deck would have to be private.
Well, I'm
Wouldn't
just
be able to get
wondering
up to the
square
front door.
footage wise, if we're like trading square footage, what exactly
Yeah.
was permitted under that first plan, square footage wise? Because we should not be going over that.
right. Well, that we can certainly get back to you with to confirm that there's no unpermitted work. Certainly, I appreciate your concern not to give credit for something that shouldn't get credit.
How old is this house?
83.
83, okay.
So,
To me, it seems reasonable that the garage portion that's on slab could get raised and be brought into compliance with brought into flood zone.
Living space.
But the living space, from seeing this, I had the problem with, there's gonna be a whole lot of construction going on in two resource areas, right, smack dab in them. And to Ashley's point about the wetland scenic views, deck versus house, I think is a pretty valid point. I don't think you see that much of the deck from this way, but you certainly see a house. So if you're treating structure as square footage, I think there has to be a calculation deck on deck and then the 1,600 square feet of living space. So, I can see the 1,600 square feet of living space being being in play as far as renovation goes, but the full three.
well, I don't think the intent would be to take the entire deck and turn it into a house. I think,
But just
if we could get the footprint to, I don't know, 2,000 or 2,200 or something, and then trade that for a reduction in the overall size of the structure, as well as raising it, pulling it back, and doing the invasives, is that something you guys would look at?
Just don't feel like it.
It's not exactly a pristine environment down there either. I mean, it's not like this is gonna be the only structure.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
you just go down the beach and there's big houses and,
Yeah.
Not that close though. I mean, people with kayaks are right there.
Oh, there is.
yeah, it is very, it's
You
right.
know, you're right there, and you see it from Monomoy as well. It's really the only structure right on the creeks. And it's not, it does, although it's painted white, it doesn't stick out that much. Not like the new homes that are being built around.
Right, only a couple of houses down there, but,
Right.
I wouldn't wanna say no necessarily. I agree that the garage could be, that space could become living space. And so to say no on the whole idea is tough without seeing it. I personally would be flexible, but I'd have to see what it was.
I like that it's coming back.
Yeah, I like that
It's
it's
coming
coming back.
back.
I'd have to see what you were thinking. It's kind of,
You want to see more detail?
well, obviously, it's a very tough one to say. Yeah.
Okay, and I get that, and part of this exercise was to just see if we were even going in the right direction at all. Certainly, if more of you agreed with Ian, we'd be done. So, and we might still be. I don't know what the majority of the board thinks, but
I tend to be more willing to trade moving away from the resource
Yeah.
for more exposure myself. I'd much rather do that than go the other way, than narrow the house and push it right up to the creeks. So
Yep.
I guess the scenic views, I appreciate that, but the scenic view is really looking from the deck out into the marsh, if you ask me.
I guess I disagree with that.
Well, I disagree with that in the senior, because there are only so many houses that are right there. Most of the
Yeah.
homes are set back.
And the deck currently, like the
But-
groundsel, goes right up to the edge of the deck.
Yeah.
So if you have house there, it really does make the structure much more evident.
And they could take care of some of that with appropriate landscaping.
Right.
Maybe that's what's really
Or
important here, is
design.
to landscape it so the
Yeah.
house isn't so visible.
But you wouldn't be able to landscape.
Yeah, it would
you
have
wouldn't
to
be able landscape away
naturalize.
the house. You can landscape away the deck.
Yeah.
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 But you
Well,
wouldn't
I think you can, the way you design it could make it look more organic. But
Right.
let me float this. If we came back, breaking up what we have a little bit, where we would identify more of a enclosed versus deck breakdown, and perhaps change the numbers. So let's say it's 3,500 square feet, and maybe we give up a little and identify how much would be deck and how much would be house. Is that something you would?
That'd certainly help.
You know,
Absolutely.
with-
Yeah,
with, with the concept that the house would definitely be getting bigger, not doubling,
Right.
but bigger.
Right.
Don't tear the house down yet, though.
No, I mean, obviously, the an architectural design house can look smaller than one that
It may be, I think I put 3,500 as far as the land subject to coastal storm flows, because that might be
Right.
the disturbance area. And I'm going by memory, but it could be that this box is probably maybe 3,000 square feet. I'm just looking at this.
Yeah, I didn't want to correct Paul, but my recollection
Yeah,
was
it
that
was
it was 3,000.
I think I put 3,500 because that would be the disturbance area, but it was probably
Yeah.
less than, looking at the 1,600 is probably not.
But if we took the 1,400 square feet of non-house now and cut that up so that some of it was added to the house and some of it remained as deck and some of it was, volunteered away as part of the net improvement, I think we could come back in 2 weeks and see if you're comfortable with that concept, with the idea that essentially we'd still be pulling back and going to the side. See,
Yeah, I think we
that's something.
need to see what then, part is.
And the new house, might be a foot or two taller at its tallest point, but I think we could really help improve the scenic views by having white paint and changing the gables and those kind of things.
Are we really pulling back? I guess when I'm looking at your footprint and one, maybe on this corner,
Yeah.
but up here we're certainly.
Well, again, we wouldn't be able to do that anyway. I mean, again, the box was just a general idea of where the shape would go of the work, but I mean, obviously would have to be set back from that well and there. The intent would be to pull this piece of it, this piece here out. The one that's projecting out, the quarter round and then that whole end of the deck right there.
Okay. I think we can come
Yeah.
back with a refined plan if I can convince the seller to give us 2 weeks. And I think we've sort of heard what you like and don't like. Unless you have any other questions.
Yeah, I also like the idea of, if all possible, using the piers that are there. I mean, they look quite healthy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You're outside my area, but
It just seems the impact of driving new,
Yeah.
that would be very.
right. I don't know why we wouldn't if they're usable.
I guess I would be happier if you were coming with an actual design of the replacement house in front of us.
Well, yeah,
Which,
that would be ideal.
sorry?
That would be ideal, but they will be
Yeah.
coming in front of us with
But,
one for.
I think this is very nebulous, and I'm very uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, I won't be able to approve this ultimately without a real design and a pretty solid construction protocol. Just because I'm picturing trucks in and out here constantly, and I don't know how you guys are going to do it.
Yeah. I get that. I think we're going to have to break this up into a couple of phases because it's such a sensitive location, and there's so many other considerations aside from just dealing with the seller's timeline. With the HDC, we'll have to do a little back and forth. But I think actually in this particular case, your interests and their interests are going to align in the sense that they're going to want low and organic, and you're going to want low and organic. So in terms of design, so I think the current design is not at all. I mean, it's not huge, but it's not sensitively designed for the area.
Other question? Oh, sorry.
And black and white.
Yeah.
And a simple plan.
Do we have any questions from the public on this one?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, welcome to the Nantucket Land Council. I'll sort of hold off commenting really until there's more to comment on as well. I guess I would just say that we would probably tend to lean more towards Commissioner Clothing and Arisman's feelings on keeping the square footage as close to the same as possible, but I also see that there's some value in pulling the structure away from the resource area. So I guess I'll just leave that and see what comes back.
Okay.
I do have one question, actually. Part of the concept here is, one house, and part of the concept might be actually two dwellings with a connecting deck or something. Do you think that matters to you?
Interesting.
Like a
Stay in the
400 or
box.
500 square foot studio offset,
That matters to me. Doesn't to me, it's staying in the box.
Right.
Something that you see in the square footage.
Yeah, as long as we're not
Yeah.
extending the footprint.
it would
Yeah.
break it up a little too, maybe. And I don't know where we're going to go with that, but I want to know if you care about that issue. Okay.
Okay.
So I think we're good.
Minimal impact.
Minimal input.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Request a continuance for 2 weeks.
Yes, please.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. 36 Blackamore Road, Omni Trust, 36 Blackamore Road.
All right, so just to recap on this briefly, while Brian's coming on, this is one that we had a kind of an informal discussion about last time as part of an ongoing enforcement that we had. So keep in mind, if you guys feel that something comes up in the discussion and something that you would like to see happen with the mayor and sooner than we order of conditions, you have the ability to require it under the enforcement. Because that may happen.
I'll share.
Okay. Brian Madden from LEC, representing the applicants, 36 Pockmill Road, Nominee Trust. So yeah, at the last meeting, kind of gave you an overview of what took place out there and the parameters and concepts behind the restoration efforts. It got some good feedback from everyone, and but I'll just walk it back a little bit for those who weren't here at the prior meeting. So this is a restoration notice of intent to address an enforcement order that was issued over the summer. I was retained in August to reestablish the wetland boundaries to then assess the extent of what took place out there. And reviewed some of the old Concom files on it as well. So what we have on the property is two isolated vegetated wetlands that are wholly on the property and two additional ones that extend onto the property. The one extending from the west is from number 40, Pocomo, that you all are well familiar with that wetland, which is the isolated land subject to flooding and vernal pool habitat for containing the fairy shrimp. So there, what I've done is flag the wetlands associated with that, projecting into the cleared limits, and the mean annual high water associated with that isolated land subject to flooding. And just to kind of, so there's a southerly isolated wetland as well, and then another one on the east side, and then there's a one basically southwest of the home. That's the D series wetland, isolated wetland. So just to kind of review the extent of the work that took place out there, there was existing lawn areas south of the home, and those were expanded out. We have the proposed, or the existing rather, created lawn areas shown on the plan. And then the southern portion of the site, basically the existing vegetation that was present there was cleared and basically grubbed and pushed off to certain areas. I don't know how many of you have been out to the site, but there's scattered brush piles in certain areas, some of which are within edges of wetlands. We're proposing to remove all that vegetated material off-site and dispose of it in a proper fashion, and restore the basically any disturbed wetland area. The total restoration area is 23,574 square feet. areas of disturbed wetland areas were 7,225. So the area was stripped of the vegetation, and there doesn't appear to be any significant grade changes that took place. There may have been one area that some fill was added based on my soil evaluations out there. That's in the corner of the B series wetland. But what was planted out there is now all meadow grasses, and I include some photos in the notice of intent that show the existing conditions out there. So just to review, so we're proposing to restore obviously the wetland areas. It's crosshatched on the plans before you. Restore the 25-foot buffer zone. Restore within 50 feet of the vernal pool that extends onto the site. And then restore portions of the 25 to 50-foot buffer zone to bring the site back into compliance with the 50% between the 25 and 50. And I think the numbers were somewhere around like 58, 59% restoration. And so just to review the proposed plantings, we talked about some of the measures that were going to be done out there. The wetland areas, and I apologize, I was hoping that we would be in a position to get you that more specific planting plan. We're still getting our ducks in a row on that end. There's a lot that's going into this. We just need a little bit more time to coordinate that. But just to highlight the proposed plantings within the wetland areas themselves, we're proposing to plant red maple saplings and swamp white oak as well. Wetland shrubs being, let's see, let me just read it so I don't misspeak. High bush blueberry, winterberry, sweet pepper bush. So we're proposing that within the B series, a diverse mix of those species. Ground cover is going to be comprised of native sedges, rushes, some cinnamon fern, marsh fern, sensitive fern, to create a diverse mix there. I did confirm that we'd be in a position to hydroseed this time of year, and hopefully things take. I don't know who has been out to the property, but the B series wetland has a little bit of standing water in it, and so the recommendation I got was that it would be best to hold off on planting that area because those plants are just going to not survive. So we would kind of plant around that, kind of the higher perimeter areas, hydroseed that area. We're going to strip all the planted meadow grasses and then hydroseed that area. The topsoil itself, again, was not stripped. It's present. It's just that vegetative rooting material that was kind of stripped and stockpiled. So within the buffer zones itself, we're proposing to plant native, let's see, we subbed out black oak with white oak for the commission's recommendation. We've added we're going to add some eastern red cedar as well. Based on some aerial photographs, it appears that there were some cedars out there, so we wanted to replicate that. And the pigment hickory, which is pretty common across the property within the upland areas. And the shrubs to be proposed are bayberry, American hazelnut, and arrowwood. And the proposal is to keep those meadow grasses there and just plant the woody shrubs and saplings. And the saplings are going to be 6-foot minimums, and shrubs on the order of 2 to 4 feet, depending upon what's available and what's really going to take based on the recommendations. So we've proposed the monitoring plan for a minimum of 2 years. Certainly if the commission wants to go beyond that, we'd be willing to do so. I think we had informally talked about defining these restoration areas out in the field, so they're maintained as such. And I guess that kind of summarizes the restoration efforts to date, and how things are coming together. So maybe I'll just turn over to questions at this point.
Have we been able to confirm that the meadow grass that was put in is not invasive love grass? Because it can't stay if it's invasive love grass.
Okay, it is the love grass. Have you been out?
No, I can just tell them.
I don't know the species type. It's not.
The love
I don't think it's sweeping love grass, correct?
You don't think so?
Doesn't that usually grow in more clumps, tufts?
Not when it's new.
Yeah.
Not when it's new like that?
Yeah.
This,
Okay.
This
the
is what it
picture
looks
I
like.
saw looks like it's the invasive.
This is what it looks like for the first couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, if that's the case, then we can.
Maybe do
Reseed.
we know who seeded it the first time? Could they confirm what it is?
I can try to find out that information. But yeah, if the commission is saying that we need to take that out in the restoration area, then we can reseed with little blue stem, Pennsylvania sedge, switchgrass, things like that. Some native fescues.
Yeah, so I would say that the meadow area should be, like a conservation mix.
Yep.
A mix of, fine fescues, hard fescues, and then pepper in, little blue stem, maybe panicum.
We can also hydroseed it.
And you can and that can pretty much all be done with hydroseed, but you'd have to probably plug in the.
I think we may be able to get those seeds in a
Yeah.
mix, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we need to.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, just to clarify something as part of the wetland seed mix, I think initially I had mentioned that last time that the Ace Areas wetland, that fringe on to the site, that we wouldn't see that area. There are some cinnamon and sensitive fern right at that edge, but there is some of that love grass, so that would be stripped and removed of off-site, kind of reseeded with the native wetland seed mix.
And I guess as much handwork and as little stripping as possible, just to avoid. It says you're going to use soil amendments as necessary.
Yeah, that would just be based on the recommendations. I don't think that there's going to be really a dramatic need. The only area, again, is that little pocket of the B series where it looks like that there was some fill added. That was basically just immediately downgrading a flag 4B. So we can. That's the only area where we may just need to have another topsoil. It'll be all clean organic loam stuff.
Where are you going to find that on Nantucket?
Well, luckily there's no invasives currently, aside from. There's no knotweed or.
It's not. I don't think it's. It does spread pretty.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's on the list yet. Is it on the list?
What?
Love grass?
Yeah, I believe it is, isn't it?
No, it's not statewide.
It's not statewide. You just.
It's not problematic. We can, the local conservation community can't stand it.
Yeah, I know. And I certainly see when it's.
I mean, we've used it for years as landscapers, but now we're starting to see it, popping up everywhere. It's really nice looking stuff. So.
Yeah, no,
The
wind is really but it doesn't allow for a whole lot of diversity.
Yeah. Well, besides that, it does kind of spread around stuff, especially to roadsides and stuff where it's out competes.
Yeah, blue stem and switchgrass would be nice.
Yeah.
Of course, the switchgrass gets kind of aggressive as well. It can be, but it's a native plant.
Would we establish a success criteria on this? Is there a standard?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Percent survival.
I know for big projects like this, it's been kind of a hodgepodge. It's gone as high as 95 before.
Yeah.
It's gone as low as 75 before. I tend to think that closer to the higher end is better.
Yeah.
More monitoring to make sure that it's good.
Well,
But I think-
I'd say like a 4 to 5 year monitoring.
Yeah, I would think longer.
I mean, it should have
Yeah.
done that
Just from
from the
the
beginning.
replacement of deer and
Yeah. Well, keep in mind too that we're dealing with a permit that is a 3-year permit,
Yeah.
so we have to come up with some creative way to get it outside of the condition of a possible certificate of compliance as an ongoing condition, which are a lot harder to track than order of condition ones. And I'll try to puzzle it out, but some creative way to reach into the future.
yeah, this could take a while.
And I guess I'm confused because we're removing all in-ground irrigation within the restoration area, but then it also says you might need drip irrigation as part of this. So
I would like to reserve that right if necessary. I mean, I don't think we're really going to need it in most of these areas, but
because again,
Can I ask you a quick question about that, fellow? Would that be something that if, in the actual permit, if we were to label the drip irrigation as temporary?
temporary is what I'm
Removal
talking
that's
about.
there?
It'd
Like-
just be
Right.
laying on the ground.
Yeah, just the.
and I just wonder, like, depending on who's laying down drip irrigation, I don't know.
You worried about just too much and
Too
Preventing
much, and
grass
then you're
growth.
removing it once you've gotten grasses and stuff through there. And are we just putting drip irrigation in to set it and forget it and not be actively monitoring the growth of these plants? I just know how that goes.
yeah. Certainly some of the saplings, I think, it would help. We could provide the commission with a little bit more detail. I think we're gonna need some field adjustments to make sure we have that flexibility if things start to dry out a little bit.
Yeah, just because if it's tied into the house's system and it's going off like the house is,
Yeah.
it's like, okay.
I don't think we want to create a scenario where it's running all the time and piping all over the place, and maybe a little bit more strategic in locations. Yeah, and obviously, if we don't want to create a scenario where we have denuded conditions or piping that's preventing grasses or other species from coming out. But we certainly want to replete restoration area and just to get that robustly in place.
We have had some pretty substantial summer droughts.
Yeah.
It seems like lately,
It's just you put the, and I understand the need for temporary irrigation, but you lay that drip hose and then you're putting hose staples in it every 3 feet, and are we going to be leaving that stuff in the wetland?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to need it in the wetland, especially if we're kind of planting this time of year, or outside of the standing water areas. But yeah, maybe for some of the cedars and stuff like that. And one thing that just escaped me.
Well, the way I think not to hop onto that, but thinking about conditioning again, we do it for some projects and they're usually erosion projects. I know it's kind of weird to compare this to, but it may be something for work of this nature that we require some sort of, regular work log to be submitted into the commission, showing what they're doing on a weekly basis for the site. Maybe some of that includes specific, providing information on what they're doing for irrigation and to make sure that they're still monitoring and dealing with it. And then we know, if they install, it's a pretty extreme case that we're dealing with, so I don't mind going a little further than we normally do by saying, if you put out, if you put out drip hose around certain trees and we have a planting plan that's planted, you could certainly mark it up that's there, tie it to the work log, and then document when each one of them comes back out. Or you could say, these areas were gone. I mean, it's be a lot of work to do, but I don't think in a case where we're looking to restore, half an acre of buffer zone and wetland area, asking them to tell us exactly what they're doing and where they're putting some of their infrastructure in, I don't think is too big a ask to do. I mean, someone's gonna be monitoring it to know when it's going on and off and probably checking their work pretty regularly, and some of the stuff is gonna take some time to do, so.
Yeah.
I don't think it's too much to ask to say, hey, we went out there on Thursday and we're there from 2 to 4, we did this, and we removed the hoses from these 2 areas and packed them away. I mean, it's a way to keep track of them so we don't lose track of them. Just a thought.
Oh yeah, just to follow up something we talked about last week was, hydroseeding at this time of the year, we may get some washout into the winter, but so there may be some follow-up touch-up work next spring with some of that stuff as well. And then probably likelihood, the plantings within the B series wetland would be contingent upon ground cover conditions, so no standing water.
I'm sorry, just to clarify again. For the most part, shrubs and trees are going to go directly in to the ground as is, not needing tons of amendments.
Yeah, based on the soil that I've seen out there, I don't think it's necessary.
And if you're seeding in those warm season grasses, it seems like you're probably not going to expect a lot of ground cover.
I don't expect a lot of robust growth that's going to start to choke out some of those plants.
No, I mean, I'm even wondering about how much ground cover is going to be there for the winter, and if you'd almost need a cover crop of some kind of annual, I don't know enough
Yeah,
about that stuff.
I'd probably want to shy away from winter rye, just how lush that comes up. But we could probably just add some straw or something like that, just to mat it down.
Hold it down.
Questions from the public? No? Okay. Any other questions?
I would like to keep the meeting open so I can submit that formal.
Yeah, no problem. We also don't have a number yet, do we?
Well, that's the thing. We filed, this is only locally.
Oh, okay.
We missed that too.
Oh. Okay.
No, but we are still waiting for, the whole point of this is to get the detailed planting plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Set out, so.
Unfortunately, it's not something that easily comes together. It's a lot.
So,
Maybe 2 weeks?
Yeah, no, 2
Continue.
weeks. Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to make sure on this one especially is the clock is ticking. I mean, it's
Yeah.
October the 19th,
Yeah.
and we've been lucky in the sense that it was, 70 degrees again today.
Right. Next week's colder.
It's been warm.
That's
That
awesome.
you get some progress going, and then have a plan set to get it back into order.
We'll continue that. 2 weeks. Excuse me. Amended orders of conditions. Hummock Pond Realty Trust, 86 Hummock Pond Road. Anybody?
He's got the 2 best ones on right back to back.
This one.
I only have a smaller size.
We got it.
Is that the new one that was submitted by Bob?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that what
I don't know if
No.
it's a lot.
He hasn't- They didn't land in our hands. We just have
Okay.
the electronic version of it.
All right. Well, yeah, just to review the updates based on the conversation last week. So starters, that existing limit of clearing within the 25-foot, we've cross-hatched that and just put a note there. It says area to be revegetated with native species, so native shrubs just to supplement the existing coverage that's right there. And we provided a little bit more detail on the dry well itself. So the concern there, again, was the potential for opening up an area, adding some crushed stone sand with the perforated pipe and kind of drawing down that perch water table. So what we've done is the dry well, the pipe itself is not perforated, it's closed, and it'll be backfilled with the native material. And so the dry well will just kind of, it only becomes perforated once it gets below that average water table.
12 feet down. Questions? Questions from the public? No. Well, make the drywall better.
That was the big question I had last
Yeah,
time.
that was always a big question.
Yeah, so I
That's a
hope
good
that
question.
answers like, yeah, that.
Yeah.
that's what I'll do.
Okay.
There's two of those, right?
Yeah. Yeah, just west of that, or
Yeah.
north.
Yeah. And that's basically just for roof, well, was roof runoff, or was
Just
it?
roof runoff.
Just
yeah.
roof runoff, it wasn't for
So
crawl space. Oh, right.
Yeah, no, nothing,
Okay.
but yeah, that
Okay,
foundation drain is not connected to
good.
the crawl space.
Okay. Seeing no comments, so you ready to close? You ready? Jeff, your recommendation?
Or, Dan, you can close and issue the amended order.
Okay.
I'll move.
Do a second? Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? No? Passes.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
For like 6 years of debate on the original one.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's
It's
Really?
out with a whimper.
No kidding. A little more
it's amazing
vocal.
what a sewer line will do.
Certificates of compliance. Diggle, 22 Folger Ave.
Sure, so Diggle at 22 Folger Ave, this was for a septic system repair and upgrade, and for the removal of a retaining wall down the end of Folger Ave, on the corner of Field Avenue. In our inspection, what's there, the septic system is properly installed, the BOH has issued its certificate of compliance on that, and the existing retaining wall has been removed and graded over and has a nice gradual slope. All the soils are stable, and I would recommend that we can issue this certificate of compliance.
Someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. Orders of conditions. We got two.
I only prepared one for us tonight. The only Lowe's matters for now was, Lowe's South, at 316. So this one's kind of interesting because you have 3 pages or 4 pages that's there. Because so much of it is related to the MISA Act, what they're getting passed around. Thought it was better instead of me trying to encapsulate those conditions to just attach their actual letter into the order to get the language completely correct and kind of the reasonings behind it. That go with it, so those conditions would be incorporated into their, so you guys can have a couple minutes to review it. And other than that, outside of our normal, materials in the 50, no permanent dewatering.
So there's a pool on the plan too, right?
Oh, totally. So there'd be a 22, pool shall not be drained or discharged. Right. To an area within jurisdiction. And then I'm gonna add a 23, that's really, so this is a new one that we've started adding since 96 Westchester. That the pool may not be treated by chemicals between November 1st and, between November 1st and May 1st. standard conditions. Once we make this, I would like to really review those and have sections that are specific to components we see a lot, like pools. So we just check the boxes, so we're not adding them into this all the time that are in there, but that sheet is more organized and easier to read than just a list of 20 conditions that we say. If your project contains a pool,
Yeah.
Right.
it's in there. And that's where we can put things in like no cultivars for native plantings can just be a standard condition for our projects. Thanks.
Right.
I was talking to a pool guy the other day, and he was making a comment about the source of the water that the pool is filled with makes a big difference. Because the town water is like perfect water, and depending on your well, you have to add all sorts of other interesting things to neutralize. So, interesting.
Yeah, because town water is treated to
Yeah.
Safe Drinking Water Act standards.
Okay. Well,
Move to approve as amended.
with the addition of 22, 23, and the MISA recommendations. Any recommendation? Yeah, was your recommendation? Have a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Alan A. Sharp.
We did close that tonight,
Did we
but
close that one? Oh.
I had instructions for positive orders. Anything anyone was concerned about specifically for that one?
That was the one in Quidnet, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the cottage,
Yeah.
raising with an S.
I guess just
The actual
when
raising.
that's going to take place as far as the pond level, right? That's that one.
Sure. We can put a timing for the pond to not be within,
Yeah.
10 feet of the foundation or some distance. I'll go out and take a look in the interim 2 weeks here, just to see the distance
See
that's
where-
there.
Mhm.
The pond a little bit open in between too, so we'll be able to gauge kind of that space. And I'll come up with something.
Well, I think emphasize no machinery down there.
Yes. I actually wonder how we actually get a machine
Down there.
to there.
You'd have to go all the way down.
You have to go down
Near the
around
entrance
where
and come
the
all the way
pond would
around.
Come down the edge of the.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
You would never make it.
You would never make it.
You couldn't get through that marsh and sink in.
And one of those, like,
No, there's the public
Crazy.
access right over
You need the
there.
marsh button.
Get it.
Yeah, the Marsh Master. Did that thing ever come to the island? Have we seen that
I
thing?
know, I thought, isn't that supposed to be like now?
That's supposed to be happening now.
We,
Maybe that
think we missed
would be a
I think we
question.
missed it. all.
Believe me.
Or did they miss it?
I think it was, no, I think they probably did.
Birth of the rules.
I'm sure they did.
Did the Marsh Master ever make it?
Marsh Master.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Did you see it? Was it cool?
Yeah, it was.
Did you ride on it?
interesting to watch. No, I didn't ride on it. I didn't. But,
Is it?
it was a really interesting piece of machine. I mean, it's kind of like, I know this is gonna, it's a big shredded machine, so it's really interesting to watch because its weight and impact really flattens out, and it really didn't leave big crazy tread marks or anything, especially going over the frag.
Yeah.
So between smashing some of the Phragmites and it getting spread out is a really look like, you've probably seen it in the mow gun where you just kind of mow through a field of frag and it kind of piles up, and kind of like that spot's what it was. Some of it they moved it through the water. It's kind of interesting to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying Nantucket should go out, buy one, but in isolated uses, it's something that's, I think, at least an interesting option that. And I think for some of what they're doing at boat, so may have been a better choice. But I think for some of the interior areas, it seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, interesting.
You could buy one. We could all play on it.
I'll let you all field trip.
I wouldn't waste your money on it.
Put out to the hayride.
Marsh Master.
If you really want to, you can get one of those slick little hovercrafts.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
can move it around. Then you wouldn't have to worry about impact at all.
Yeah.
They're pretty damn noisy.
Okay, extension orders, orders of conditions. We've got two or the same?
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, we
Sure.
read both these at once.
That'd be great.
They were both for Magnet Marine, that's the Taylor Green
Yeah.
boatyard.
Yep.
They both, we reissued them before, as they were not recorded, and now they are unable to find them. So they just asked us to reissue them so they can record them. But they, those orders were extended until August of 2018. So they're still in effect. We just need to put it on the record to make it clear on the record.
Okay. Make a motion.
I'll put it on
Motion to issue the extension for
For losing them.
both,
Oh,
for both,
yeah.
20 North Bainbridge Street and 20 North Bainbridge Street.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Extensions approved. All right. Other business. Okay. Approval of minutes. Unless-
Terry, I just had one, there was a quote for me in there about I was in favor of an impervious driveway, and I think that should, if I said that,
Do you remember which
I would have said, yeah, let's see. It was on, Mac Daddy Trust. Yeah, Mac Daddy. And it's, I don't know, about halfway down the page. Thinks an impervious driveway is a big benefit. So a pervious driveway would be a big benefit.
It's so difficult with impervious and impervious. Same discussion.
Yes.
Any other voices? Okay, well, with that, we'll approve the rest of the minutes. It's consent.
So I think since we discussed it, I think we have to have a motion now, don't we? If I
Well,
remember right.
Yes.
Oh.
You can just make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Ah, okay.
So moved.
Okay. All's in favor?
Aye.
Well, I'm abstaining since I wasn't at the meeting.
Oh, all right, okay.
There we go.
David wasn't at the meeting,
That's right.
and who else wasn't? So three of us are abstaining, I believe.
So I'll second it, or I'll make sure. Whichever one.
Yeah. Okay. The quorum that was here last time is perfect, so we're good to go.
Okay. Enforcement actions.
I don't really have anything to say. We're still gonna go on the 36 April one through the notice.
Okay.
So we have a couple. We have the one that's still pending in court
Yep.
with North Beach Street. That's still ongoing. And then the rest of them are all either in various stages of notices of intent or have been completed. So wherever we are.
Okay.
Oh, I do have one. So I do have a quick update. One on Ernie asked us to follow up on. We followed up on the cottage and the other pond cottages in Goodnett. When we went out, we didn't see a pipe that was directly discharging. We saw some very suspicious pipes that looked like they had been recently taken apart and reworked, and didn't know if they had shut it down seasonally, if they had moved stuff around. So we've kind of called in the Board of Health as well to go over what their existing septic system is, and to try to tag team through figuring out what's going on, because I asked them to go out and look at it, and there are some definite issues, like on the side of the building, there's a pipe that comes out of the side of the building that is capped with a garden hose that runs to nowhere. And it looks to me like that pipe probably connects to a kitchen sink at a minimum. I don't know what else could physically go in the building, but I asked them to go take a look, and if they're interested, we may issue out one of our first ever joint enforcements with them to figure out what's going on out there. Because if they're directly discharging wastewater from a house, whether it's from the sink or toilet or shower, whatever it is, I would like to know, because it goes very steeply down the hill and then right beside the pond. So I thought it'd be nice to bring them in as well. They have a much better ability to issue fines and do things too, and they are a lot nastier to deal with than we are, just by the virtue of the way their rules are set up. So
Okay.
it's fun to watch them get fired up. So
Sounds like town meeting, jeez.
You should try sitting next to him. It's all thing.
Roberta?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Loves what he does.
For the job,
Okay, reports, CPC.
Now, CPC is wading through a foot-high stash of 22 applications for funding.
Wow.
Which mostly I missed because I was away for some of it, but we still got 3 more meetings. And then comes the difficult business of winnowing them down to $7.5 million
reality.
worth of requests, and only about $2 million to dismiss this year. So that's what's happening there. If anybody wants to come and watch.
I actually did.
Nothing with MPUDC. I suppose mosquitoes are,
Yeah, mosquito control's done till spring, essentially.
yep. No frost yet, close to a frost down by me.
Really?
Yeah, well, we're down like in the swamp. Any other committees? I don't think so. Commissioner comments? I have one curiosity.
We're at an hour and a half right now, so
That's
this
good.
is
Well, it
uncharted
was a
territory
nice
for
agenda.
us.
The one was, I was curious about Steve Ender's observation. Anything happened with the gray water issues in the?
Yes, to some degree. It's a topic that's kind of picked up from Steve a little bit for figuring out how we can be better managing that. We're just trying to
Yeah.
calm the seas a little bit because Steve is not the most tactful creature of these kinds of things. So we're trying to get some information on it. We're trying to get the boat basin and a few of the other places to come in, a few of the mooring companies to come in and maybe try to work with them to get some sort of better monitoring, whether it's dye tablets or protocols in place to deal with it, or to find some spots where they maybe get people that are coming in to voluntarily sign up for, testing what's coming out of the boat or seeing it, to start to make some headway on it. I'll be honest, it kind of got backburnered a couple weeks ago by those of us involved until we got through town meeting. We kind of felt that was, since that's the sewers were another issue that same group of people was working on, was getting that through and to where it is, was more time sensitive than dealing with the gray water. Then hopefully we'll have something better in place for next spring when boats start to come back. With a little more time.
Well, I think we all feel that it should be mandatory, right?
Yeah, I'm just questioning.
And is that something that needs to go before town meeting next spring?
It may, and that's one of the questions we asked. It's a question that I actually spoke with John Giorgio, who's another one of the Coleman and Page attorneys, about, who is kind of our town meeting specialist. And his comment to me was, that sounds really involved, because when we get past Monday, this is the last Wednesday I talked to him, when we get past Monday, and we revisit that right after that. Yes, so that's kind of where we are, but I would like to, Roberto and I have been talking about for a while now, maybe having this winter a joint meeting of the commission and the Board of Health to talk about some of these issues that overlap our jurisdictions, because we feel like a united approach at it from both of them will get us where we want to go a lot faster than us having a discussion, them having a discussion, and then us having a discussion about their discussion, but doing the same thing. They're taking action where we can just sit, all 12 of you in a room at the same time, and say, let's make a plan and let's go from there. But we also want to get you guys all the information we can about what it is, how we can deal with it, and more importantly, what options we have at the end. Because has been a big question is, if we started to do mandatory dye tablets, if you are putting it out, I mean, is it a fine? Is it you're kicked out of the harbor? What's the is it you're required to retrofit your boat to not do that? There's lots of questions about what's there, and then the legality of doing some of those things. So
I got the impression it was more a shortfall on the boat
there's some question too, and that's something that we're trying to also
That's-
mine out what
yeah.
exactly their infrastructure
Right,
handles
what's
and
missing,
deal with.
or is it?
And if it's
just-
something that
yeah.
should have been addressed a long time ago and been upgraded to accommodate larger flows,
Yeah.
and things that are there, there are many question
Questions.
marks. So,
Okay.
but I think that's something that we'll discuss through the winter.
Great.
But
Well, I advocate if the boat's over 100 feet long and they start pumping it out, then a public scuttling out at sea would be
Natural reef.
Yeah.
Okay.
not that that's extreme.
Sorry.
Yeah, there it
Only you, Ian.
is.
I'm with you. Just
Administrative back and forth.
Yeah, real quick, just a couple thoughts that we had and kind of some follow-up, and we just kind of touched on it a little bit. Obviously, that joint meeting is something that we'd like to set up at some point, figuring out what that is. But I also didn't know, through the winter, people are, and our agendas stay kind of light, that people would be opposed to doing not one a month, but one maybe every other month, doing either looking at the regulations and trying to go through those and updating and kind of keeping those on top of what we're seeing and addressing some of the things that we've been addressing a lot. Or maybe in that same time frame, maybe an extra meeting once every 2 months that's on a specific topic that we're dealing with, whether it's, invasives or fertilizers or other things that are there, just to get some professionals that are here to come talk about it and hopefully answer questions that people are presenting a lot of information to maybe get you guys armed with some better information than maybe what you already have. To have them come in and talk about how things get on the invasive list, new techniques. I mean, we could have a lot of people come in and do those things. Just as an example, I know Seth Wilkinson did one for the landscapers at Bartlett Farm not too long ago that I thought was really beneficial. I learned a lot from
Yeah.
that for techniques that they're doing.
Yeah, very good.
And if it's one like that, we may also be able to do it not necessarily here, but we could do it at some place like Bartlett's or some place that's a lot more interesting to go to and invite other members of the public to say, hey, the compound is going to have a workshop on invasive species. You guys can kind of run the workshop as a meeting and have questions, but then other people can come and listen and sit in too. So I will throw out that any place that's handicap accessible and available to the public is eligible for meetings. So we can get creative if we want. Just throwing it out there. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good look to be like we're having it at the brewery, but
Yeah, it seems like that's where you're going. That's good.
there are other choices too that we've had. We've done meetings at
Yeah.
before. So we can explore that option if we just don't want to sit in here.
Yeah.
Because in here we get light attendance from professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we've seen over time.
Sorry, speaking of that, and just making a commissioner comment, I had thought about this because mosquito control, we try and put out educational pamphlets, and part of our purview is public education to the wetlands.
Yes.
And maybe our involvement as far as putting something in the paper about fertilizer's impact, or just some of these things that we see regularly to try and educate. Hey, you can't just go clear a property. Have you checked that it's not natural heritage? Something along those lines, just to get it out there. I don't know, that could be part of those special meetings.
Plus,
to
our
talk about.
Builders Association, I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
contractors are right there in the front lines.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Dr. Lawrence Sinatra.
So yeah, I'm always happy to
She
do
does,
any of those.
the building,
She does the energy for the town, but then she also does the Builders Association.
she does, yeah.
Yeah,
Coordinates that.
so if you have a builder's license, you have to go every month, you got to get 12 CU
Yeah.
units.
Yeah.
And so they've been doing them once a month at the fairgrounds.
Yeah, that would be that's a great idea. You know, get in
I
front of
know
builders
I gave a
association.
talk on wetlands a couple of years ago to
The real estate,
now
yeah.
to the real estate brokers, to NARA, the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers, because they also have to do CEUs. So if anyone has any interest from that, or someone approaches you, those are always nice to go to have. I'm happy to go, but it's always nice if one of the commissioners can go as well, because that provides kind of this is what we're looking at. I sit on the board, and it's nice to hear from a friendly face and not from someone that works for the town sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you can give out tickets.
Kind of. Yeah, I would say we're always open to those, but if we'd like to start to do I know it's stuff we talked about for the fertilizer advisory committee as well, trying to get more stuff out more regularly, but they can be short and to the point, and to do some of those things. But I think that'd be really cool to get some more public education and hopefully avoid things like 36 Pokemon owners going.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, but I got a notice from my neighbor 6 months
Or I
ago.
think it would also be great to get in front of, at least from the Concom end, in front of places like Toscana, and places that have big machinery that excavate and clear brush and do those things, just to say. So if someone asks you to do it, ask if they've checked with, do they need Concom permit to do it? Arm yourself with questions before you do it, so.
But Paul was saying there's only 2 or 3 guys that are doing brush cutting.
There are many.
I don't know about that though.
Dan
Beard and,
Yeah, they were just talking about Danny.
Large scale clearing, yes, but there are a lot of landscape companies that will do small scale stuff
Yeah,
as well.
there's plenty of clearing you could do with
So,
pretty small
So
equipment.
you were talking that attachment for
The
that.
ambusher. The ambusher, yeah.
it's a great name.
But I think, Jeff, you're also talking
Marsh
internally, we
master
need to
ambusher.
just sort of get some of our regs updated though.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, when I first landed with the commission, one of the things I was trying to do is I looked at the regulations that we had, and the dates for revisions were like 1998, and then 2007, and then there was another one in like 2008, and then there was another big gap from when we did them last time in 2013. And to me, the interest that we're protecting changed so frequently
Yeah.
that I think at a minimum, looking at them every 3 years to update to what we're seeing. And I always feel like consultants are always a step ahead of the regulations, or they're willing to try things that are a little bit in front. I would love to change that paradigm a bit and make it so they are always playing catch up to the regulations, and that we are proactively trying to address things. And there are other things that are really simple too, like one of the thoughts at town meeting that Roberto and I had talked about before is, in this last calendar year, we've approved $160 million essentially worth of sewering projects. A lot of these areas have wetlands. Nantucket is loaded with wetlands that are probably going to require permits to convert from septic to sewer for people to do. And it's an expensive process and expensive on homeowners. I would really like to try to find a way for us to be able to deal with, large-scale changes that are of clear, significant benefit, quicker and easier. I'm not saying to make it, an administrative approval, but if we had something in our regulations that instead of having to apply for a full notice of intent, if you're only applying to do just the sewer changeover and abandon the septic system, that regardless of buffer zones, you can do that as an RDA, as a project. Kind of like what we do with invasive species, where you can do invasive species work to the wetland edge under an RDA in there. But that can be the only components involved, and it would still have to come in front of the commission. So it's not I'm going to put an addition on the house now and deal with it. It's I only want to convert and tie into the sewer, and to find a way to do it, or to find a way for areas that there are 4 or 5 properties that are all impacted to the same thing, to figure out a way to get them together to just do it easier. I'd like to make not the review easier and the interest to be lightened, but an easier, more economical way than doing a full notice for things like that. I think those are discussions that we could have to find ways to help that process along. Granted, we got plenty of time to deal with that one because it's going to be a while before that project is in the ground. So, but I don't know. It's nice to be friendly and help people out and say, instead of spending $1,000 just to file your permit application for something you're already going to be paying, $50 grand for to tie in and do all the work, that it's going to cost you $25 to come in and put your stuff in front of the board and to do it. So, just trying to find ways to be creative and encourage people to do it and not stall forever.
Yep.
And we have a lot of houses that are about to happen. So those are just some thoughts that we've been kind of mulling around. And adopting, and the other thing we need to adopt into our regulations is an actual schedule of penalties for violations. So we can start issuing tickets up to that $300. Because right now we're stuck with 50 because we don't specifically call it out. And it can be as simple as saying, I think, that any enforcement order issued is a mandatory $300 fine for any violation. I think it can be really very simple. You just have to have the language that says it. And it can be pretty clear. But we need to do that too.
Per day.
All good?
Yeah, so I'll stop talking. We got it to an hour and 45.
Okay.
Don't want you guys to get out of practice.
Anything else?
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn? There's a move to adjourn.
Second.
Second. All in favor?